of our discussion. Yes, the recording is up. So if I may ask, ladies and gentlemen, during the first part of our discussion, or the first part of the presentation, we will first provide Advocate Etienne Robenheimer the opportunity to share a few thoughts with us. And if you have any questions or in one of my comments, I may suggest that you use either the chat with everyone, little block on the right-hand side, the bottom of your screen. So you can post there if you want to chat for, or ask a question, or you can make a note as well. So first of all, then, so that's in terms of just the arrangements that we have. At the same time, please ensure that your mics are muted just for the purposes of the recording, so that we have a clear voice recording as well without any interference. All right, ladies and gentlemen, then yes, then it's a privilege for me to introduce this evening Advocate Etienne Robenheimer, who's an advocate in one of the chambers in the Pretoria area. I know Advocate Robenheimer for many, many years. He was, when I've met him, an attorney, well accomplished, well reckoned in his field. And it's always a pleasure to sit down and discuss things with him and talk to him. And his way of reasoning and his way of arguing and his way of putting things forward was always for me one of the major strengths that I've always have learned something from him in the way that he put together and argue things. And I can tell you I've learned quite a lot during our years that I have known Advocate Robenheimer. So I think you've indicated to me, let's go and have a conversation with you guys regarding this. So Etienne, in terms of the format and how you want to do it, it's all up to you. So without any further ado, let me pass over to you. And and thank you very much for this evening and also spending some time with some of our students. And I believe that the students that's here online this evening are students that's taking their studies very serious, and hopefully the guys that's going for distinctions in labor relations. So guys, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this evening with us. Etienne, over to you.
Thank you, Ink. Let me just make sure whether I'm audible.
Yes, you are definitely. I can hear you clear.
Okay, thank you, Ink. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for affording me the opportunity to have just a quick talk and a discussion with you guys in respect of labor relations and labor law. Now, I'm not going to belabor the point and start way back when. Let's just go back to when South Africa was became a constitutional state. That happened in 1994 when we got our first constitution. It's actually not entirely correct to say it's our first constitution. That's not our first constitution. We had constitutions before. We had constitutions already in the 1800s, but South Africa was never a constitutional state. So what that means is we didn't have a supreme constitution. That's a very important term to understand. Not one of our previous constitutions were a supreme constitution. It was, in other words, it was a piece of legislation on the same level as any other piece of legislation. That's the first important aspect that we need to take into consideration. Another further very important aspect that we have to take into consideration is the courts in South Africa did not have a testing powers. What I mean by that is that the courts could not test legislation because there were no criteria against which they could test it. They could test it only with regards to procedural aspects. Now, where this comes from is it comes from the Westminster system of governance that we inherited from the British. It's part of the British common law, and it is still to some degree applicable in former British colonies, like, for instance, Australia and also New Zealand. South Africa did away with the Westminster system in the, I think it's roundabout in the mid-80s, but there were still remnants thereof. And when we got the interim constitution in 1994 and then the final constitution in 1996, we did away with, in total, we did away with the Westminster system. So one of the very important rights that was protected in the Constitution was the right to fair labor relations. And that is contained in Section 23 of the Constitution. Now, Section 23 is a very, very wide provision. I'm going to read it to you. You can go and read about it. But I'm just going to read it to you so that we can just get the context. So Section 23, the heading of Section 23 deals with labor relations. And the section reads as follows: everyone has the right to fair labor practices. Every worker has the right to form and join a trade union, to participate in the activities and programs of the trade union, and to strike. Every employer has the right to form and join an employer's organization and to participate in the activities and programs of an employer's organization. Every trade union and every employer's organization has the right to determine its own administration, programs, and activities, to organize and to form and join a federation. Every trade union, employer's organization, and employer has the right to engage in collective bargaining. National legislation may be enacted to regulate collective bargaining to the extent that the legislation may limit a right in this chapter. The limitation must comply with Section 36(1). National legislation may recognize union security arrangements contained in collective agreements. So that set the tone for labor relations, let's call it, in the new dispensation in South Africa. Now, this had a dramatic influence on how we approach labor relations. Apart from that, and you will recall when I read the article, when I read the section, reference was made to certain other aspects. And that led to a whole host of different legislative instruments dealing with different aspects, like, for instance, the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Employment Equity Act, and then also spawned from that the different codes and the triple B, double E acts and so forth. So that changed the whole landscape within which labor relations operate in South Africa. I want to just look at two important aspects. Obviously, the time that we have at our disposal, we cannot do an in-depth study of anything. So I've just chosen two very important, what I think two very important aspects are. And that is, I want us to have a look at agency shop agreements and closed shop agreements. Now, where does this originate from? Let me quickly ask you a question. Does everybody know what an agency shop agreement is and what a closed shop agreement is? Let me quickly explain to you what that is. So, an agency shop agreement is in a specific employment situation. Let's call it, at a specific employer. Employees join a trade union, and that trade union then negotiates for recognition. That trade union then gets recognition, and one of the advantages of trade union recognition is that the trade union will then be entitled to have their monthly dues deducted from the salaries of the employees and then paid over to the trade union. There is, however, no obligation on an employee to join a trade union. So it can easily happen that a trade union is the majority trade union at an employer, but all the employees does not belong to that trade union. The argument on behalf of the trade union is that everybody at that employer gets the advantages or gets the benefits of the negotiations that's being done by the trade union for their members. Because a company or an employer cannot say, okay, well, the trade union has negotiated for certain benefits, whatever those benefits may be, but only the trade union members are going to get those benefits. So everybody now gets the benefits. There's, let's say, a salary increase. The argument by the trade union is, but people that are not paying us to negotiate on their behalf are getting advantages that we are negotiating. So then in those circumstances, they can go and they can say, no, we want to enter into an agency shop agreement with the employer. The effect of that is that in terms of the agency shop agreement, the parties can agree that even if you do not want to join the trade union and become a member, they will still deduct money from your salary and pay it over to the union because you're getting the advantages and you're getting the benefits. Now, when we are discussing this, there's a couple of very important principles that we have to take into consideration. Obviously, we've now dealt with Section 23, but Section 18, and I'm referring to Section 18 of the Constitution, says that any person has the right to freedom of association. So you cannot be forced to join the trade union, but the trade union can say, well, you're getting benefits, and because you get benefits, it's just fair that you should pay. So that's where the agency shop agreement comes from. Section 25 of the Labor Relations Act states that a representative trade union and an employer or an employees organization may conclude a collective agreement to be known as an agency shop agreement, requiring an employer to deduct an agency fee from the wages of employees identified in the agreement who are not members of the trade union but are eligible for membership. Right. There are a couple of requirements for this agency shop agreement to be a valid agreement. As we've now already stated, that the first requirement is that it must be contained in a collective agreement. The second element is that there must be an agreement that the employer deducts agency fee from the wages of the employees. Together with that, there is a requirement that those employees must be identified in the agreement. All right. And the members who are identified in the agreement must not be members of the trade union, but they must be eligible to be members of the trade union. That's very important because it is an indication that these people decided voluntarily not to join the trade union. They're eligible, but they don't want to join the trade union for whatever reason also. Right. There's a next very important aspect, requirement, and that is that there must be no requirement, there must be no obligation in the agreement obliging these people to become a member of the trade union. The agency fee must be equivalent or less than the subscription fee of members. You can't charge them higher. Right. The subscription fee could also amount to a percentage of the wages of the employees, and then where there are two or more registered trade unions, the highest amount of the subscription that would apply to an employee. In other words, the amount deducted must be paid into the separate accounts of the representative trade unions. All right. Now, we've got agency shop agreement. An agency shop agreement is fairly popular all across the globe. Then there is a second type of agreement, and that is a closed shop agreement. Now, a closed shop agreement is where a trade union who is the majority union in a specific workplace the effect of they are the majority trade union, they enter into a closed shop agreement, and in terms of a closed shop agreement, the employer may not allow any other trade union to be registered for that specific workplace. That's the effect of a closed shop agreement. Now, before you can enter into a closed shop agreement, the workers must vote by means of a ballot, and 2/3 of the employees must vote in favor of this agreement. And then you could enter into a closed shop agreement. Section 26 of the Labour Relations Act states that a representative trade union and an employer or an employer's organization may conclude a collective agreement to be known as a closed shop agreement, requiring all employees covered by the agreement to be members, that's the next one, to be members of the trade union. A closed shop agreement is only binding if a ballot has been held of the employees to be covered by the agreement and 2/3 of the employees voted in favor of the agreement. There is no provision in the agreement requiring membership of the representative trade union before employment commences, and it provides that no membership subscription or levy deducted may be paid to a political party, same as a agency shop agreement, as an affiliation fee or contributed in cash to a political party, or used for any expenditure that does not advance the social economic interests of employees. Now, it should be clear to you that there is a potential problem with an agency shop agreement because it has the possibility of infringing Section 18 of the Constitution. I'm not saying it does. I'm saying it has the potential to infringe. In other words, if you want to go and work at a specific employer, and that employer is covered by an agency shop agreement, you will be required to join the trade union. You can't work there if you don't join the trade union. So there's a bit of a debate there. So why did I use these two aspects? The reason why I use these two aspects, ladies and gentlemen, is just to illustrate how the landscape in respect of labor relations have changed since 1994. Before 1994, these agreements were not possible. There's obviously a lot of other agreements that was also not possible, and I just chose these two to illustrate that, and to illustrate how important it is to realize that the landscape has changed, and the Labour Court has pronounced on this. Uh, Let me just give you a reference here quickly. In solidarity, on behalf of members employed in the motor industry and automobile manufacturers employers organization, Nissan, Toyota, Volkswagen, Ford, BMW, etc., etc. And versus NUMSA, it's a 2017 case, where it states that if an agency shop agreement does not comply with the strictly comply with the provisions of the Labour Relations Act, it's void ab initio, which means that it's void right as from the beginning. So the Labour Court is very clear on this, and that is that you have to comply with the provisions. Let me just pause here for a minute and entertain some questions. Are there any questions? Henk, have you identified questions?
All right, there's no questions yet on the chat function there, but let us open up to the people joining us. Guys, any questions, please? Any comments that you would like to make? Just unmute your mic and share with us. So while you are thinking about possible questions or comments, I think the aspects here that Advocate Robinard mentioned to us are quite critical, and I know that these are specific things that are clearly part of your curriculum as well. And you would have noticed that he was explaining it in a very logical, very straightforward manner, which is often what we would like to see when we also receive your answers about things, you know. So quite important. So yeah, so thanks for sharing in the way that you are sharing there, Etienne. I think that's quite important.
I would suggest, Henk, that the students can most probably this could be a very good maybe assignment, or at least a debate, or a colloquium, debate the whole issue of whether a closed shop agreement would meet the requirements of, or would um, be an affront to the principle of the freedom of association. One can debate that and say, well, you know, why why should I belong to a trade union? I don't want to belong to a trade union. It's fine. You can take my money because I get the advantages, but I don't want to be associated with a specific trade union for whatever reason. There could be hundreds of reasons for that. And you can take my money because I get the advantages, but I don't want to be part of a trade union for whatever reason. So I think that's a good debate to have, or it's maybe a good assignment, or maybe somebody wants to write a thesis, or a mini thesis. That's most certainly something to keep in mind. Any other questions, remarks, comments?
Let's hear.
This is your time. Hello.
Yes, the opportunity now to ask and have clarity. Let's hear. Anybody? Okay, then it seems like you were very straightforward and understanding, and more everybody's too scared to ask something. All right,
I
there's
see.
Julia.
Julia has raised her hand.
Yes, Julia, please unmute your mic and speak to us.
Good evening, Mr. Hank. Good evening, Mr. Edwin.
Good
Hi,
evening.
Julia. You're a bit vague. I'm struggling to hear you. Could you
Okay,
maybe just try and turn up your microphone, if you don't
okay.
mind, please?
Let me take off my headset. I think it's the
Yes,
headsets.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
it's
can
much
hear
better.
clearly.
Thank you very much.
All right. So I do have a question. It's a general question. Because now we're talking about closed shop agreements that okay, if maybe the employee is looking to join employment at that specific company or say department, they have to agree to maybe pay a fee if they're not gonna join that union, right? So here's the question. When unions get engaged in collective bargaining with a company, when a certain agreement is reached, say for example it's a salary raise, doesn't the salary raise already go for every employee, or does it only cover the employees that are for that union? How does that work? Will they only increase the salaries for those employees, or do they increase the salaries for everyone? I think I'm confused there. How does it normally work?
No, when the union gets involved in negotiations, they negotiate for everybody. That's where the agency shop comes from, because the union says, well, we are negotiating for everybody, and everybody gets the benefit, but they don't pay us. So that's why we want to enter into an agency shop agreement. The effect of an agency shop agreement is that um, you don't have to join the union, but you're still going to pay them.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the agreement is then to deduct it from them, from the employees, whether they are members or not, and pay it over to the union, because the
Mm,
union is doing the work on behalf of all the employees, not only specific employees.
okay. Okay, that makes sense. So will that mean that for companies, I don't know if this applies to every company, even does it happen that some companies don't have these closed shop agreements? And what happens to employees who are not part of a union in those kind of employees? Or does this exist in each and every company?
No, well, it's part of collective bargaining. If the union wants to negotiate, then they negotiate, and they can obviously include that in the collective bargaining process and the collective bargaining agreement, but it's not necessarily there. It's not obligatory to have it there, and there could be numerous factors why it could not be there. Maybe there's a lot of unions. It's a unionized environment. In other words, there's more than one union, and maybe some of the employees belong to certain unions, and other belong to other unions. So all the employees belong to a union, not the same union. So
Okay.
then there's no necessity for an agency shop agreement. But
Mm,
if you have a situation where there's um, maybe there's if you look at the whole workforce is not unionized, and there's a portion that's not unionized, but they get the advantages, they get the benefits.
mm,
That
mm.
would be an ideal situation where um, uh, you the union would get involved in collective bargaining, and then uh, enter into an agency shop agreement.
Okay. Now it makes sense. So I get it. It's the in the essence that okay, you are benefiting, so pay us a certain fee because obviously you get the benefits. And then
Yes.
my last question is that as you are speaking of unionized environments, if there's a couple or several unions in one environment, which decision covers everybody? Because I'm sure each and every union probably bargains maybe let's say different terms, you know. Um, I think I'm just trying to understand what happens. Does it mean that if I am under maybe SATU, do I get the benefits that SATU has brought? And if there's another union that bargains and get maybe better conditions, will it only apply to their members only?
Well, you see, that's where the whole negotiation process now becomes very interesting. I'm going to give you another example in a minute, from a different perspective. But this is now where um, and sometimes this, negotiations boils down to a power play, and employers in certain circumstances and instances have used the let's say the power play between unions um, to negotiate certain benefits that they are claiming away, because the unions don't agree with each other. So that also happens, but normally it very seldom happens that um, one union would say we want 10% and the other union say, okay, we settle on 5%. It does happen, and then that is then implemented. I want to refer you to an example where I was actually involved in a different capacity. It was in a specific industry where my my client was it was in the pharmaceutical industry, and my client was the highest paying employer in that industry. So when the unions started their negotiations, the end result of what they wanted to achieve was already lower than what my client was already paying his employees. So the other players in the industry, I'm talking about employers, they couldn't reach an agreement with the unions. My client said, well, I'm not going to be part of the negotiations because I don't want to prejudice my employees, because I'm already paying them more than what you want. Your highest uh, demand is less than what I'm already paying, so I don't want to be part of this party. The rest of the industry then got involved in protracted negotiations. They couldn't reach an agreement, etc., etc., and it then led to a strike. They went through the whole strike process, voted, etc., etc., and they decided in that industry to strike. Obviously, the employees at my client did not participate in the strike. The other unions then went and they said, okay, we want you to participate as a show of solidarity, a sympathy strike. Now, the employees at my client then said, well, we don't really want to do this. But then the whole intimidation and manipulation and domination started. And at the end of the day, we had to go to court to protect my client from the picketing and the strike action and the picketing action, etc., etc. Now, let me just explain something to you. My client was in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, which is an industry where the error margin is very, very, very low. Very high. Because of the sanitation situations and the possible going bad of medicines. These medicines have to be manufactured under very, very strict conditions. And conditions I'm talking about temperature, oxygen levels, dust levels, etc., etc. My client was also granted a license to manufacture pharmaceutical products overseas based on the license that they had in South Africa. Because of the strike action and the picketing action, the trucks that would transport the pharmaceutical products would, for instance, be stopped at the gate. And that cannot happen because those trucks transport those medicines under very strict conditions, temperature and moisture content and so forth. And if it takes too long to deliver them to wherever they have to be delivered, they condemn it. They physically measure the amount of dust particles in the factory. And if the dust particles in the factory is above a certain percentage, they condemn a whole batch. So these striking workers were burning tires outside the factory, and that got into the factory. So we had to go to court, and we had to say to the court, listen, yeah, it's our client is at risk, not only at risk in South Africa, but its overseas operations are at risk because if the regulator comes and they close down the factory, or they do an inspection and they come to the conclusion that too much or too many batches have been condemned, then they can either cancel the license, or they can um, uh, uh, bring in what do you call it, uh, conditions for the license. So we went to court, and the court granted the interdict. At the end of the day, our client wasn't involved in anything. They were doing their job, and they were paying their employees very good salaries. So that's just to illustrate to you on the other side, from the employer's perspective, that they part of the industry organization, the employers organization, as they can be, but they're not part of the salary determination. They said, no, we don't want to be part of that. We will determine our own salaries. So that's just an illustration from a different perspective. Any other questions?
Thank you there. Thank you there. So I think it's
Le-
also very good question that was there. And thank you in that very brilliant, very clear explanation on that. So I think what we also see, that although there may be the different agreements that is established, there's also there could be sometimes an exception on whatever is in that agreement. So there might be different situations that happen, and one need to obviously then handle each one with their own merits, and their own circumstance of their own context in which they happen. All right. So sometimes everything is not just clear, yes or no, even in the terms of labor relations, and even within disagreements. So yeah. So any other questions, guys? Any other comments? All right. So how did you experience? Let me tell quickly that you get some insight into better understanding this, the two agreements that Victor Robin was sharing. I see we got some thumbs up there from some of the students. They showing positive there. Julie also said great. All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Okay. So maybe, Etienne, if I can then ask, maybe if you can proceed maybe to some closing remarks or closing thoughts. Then before I will then also close down. I see we've got about 10 minutes left to our session. Right. There was another hand. Let me quickly see who was raising the hand there. Oh, no. You just raised and took it down. Okay. All right. Etienne, over to you.
Yes. Henk, thank you, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the discussions and the questions. I think it's just important that we need to understand that the landscape has changed. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the landscape is still changing, and the landscape is not is not fixed. The landscape will be changing, and the landscape will be changing consistently. And there's a lot of different elements that's changing the landscape. We've had COVID. A lot of people started realizing that there's a different way in which we can do things. The fact that we are sitting here in front of our computers and having a discussion is to a large degree attributable to COVID, because we had to make a plan to keep the economy running. And this facility that we have here is very, very important. I mean, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we didn't have this. What did we then use to talk to each other? It was, can anybody recall what was it called?
Not a telephone, basically, isn't it? Or
Yeah, I know
yeah.
we had this FaceTime or whatever. I
Yes,
can't rem
yes, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can't recall that. Um, I used to try and use that to talk to my daughter in America. It wasn't very successful, but and now with I mean, there's a whole host of facilities. Apart from that, uh, the way in which we are working and the way that work is being done is changing dramatically. Um, and it's going to change the way that we do um, our labor relations and how we do labor law. Um, as a practicing advocate, um, for a period of about 2 years, I was never in court. I did all my court appearances online. I ran trials online. I did opposed motions online. I did at one stage. I acted as an acting judge, and all the matters that I adjudicated were online. And that's just one aspect. I had a discussion with a lady today. She works for an international company, headquartered in Switzerland, but they've outsourced certain functions to India. They've outsourced another function to the human resource function is outsourced to Poland. Their financial department is outsourced to India. The legal department is outsourced to Turkey, and that's just one aspect. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're living in an unbelievably interesting time, dynamic time, and things are changing, and we need to adapt to the changes. It's as simple as that.
Mm, mm.
The,
I
the
think,
biggest the biggest investment that people say you can make is in your own skills and in your own character and in your own capabilities. That
absolutely.
that makes you as a person more competitive.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you,
Thanks also.
Henk,
Thank,
I see there's
thank you also.
some
Yes,
more questions.
yes. There was one more question here from Cornelia. He said, "Why must I pay the fee if the union is not negotiating in my favor? For instance, if I want 8%, but then the union eventually agree on a 5%, and that's one of the reasons I don't join a union. So why must I pay the fee?"
Well, because you get the 5%. If the union was not there, you would have got nothing.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
fact
that's very true.
the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, is that the union is not always going to get what they want because it's dependent on a process of negotiation. Let's take, for instance, the situation currently in Tshwane, where I live, where Samvu and Imatu has been involved in negotiations with the the city council and there's been a strike. The strike is actually an unprotected strike, and it's been going on for close on 2 months, and the city council says, well, we can't afford it. We just don't have any money. We can't pay you your yearly increase. Now, that opens a total new question. And that is, how far can a bargaining council or a court go into this to determine, well, do you have money or don't you have money? Can a court, for instance, say to a city council or to an employer for that matter, well, maybe you should drop this project and take the money from this project and use it for this? That's a question that That's open for discussion. I'm not entirely sure that a court can do that. Court cannot say how you should spend your money. A court can say, well, you didn't spend your money properly, but a court cannot say how you should spend your money.
Absolutely, very true there. All right, so Cornelia, so my conclusion there on what Advocate Robin shared with us is that yeah, well, probably you wouldn't have the 5% if the union was not there. All right, so again, I think it's a question that we do not get everything that we really want all the time, and at least that they were successful in that case, maybe to at least negotiate that 5%. Ladies and gentlemen, then lastly, I just want to also echo what Advocate Rabiner was indicating lastly in terms of the changing landscape, specifically for the students that is doing human resources management. And when you are going to progress to your third year and your advanced diploma, your honors, you are going to learn a lot about the new landscape and the new world of work, which is some of the factors that he have mentioned, and that we are looking at, that we know businesses might be spread all over the globe. And then obviously that also brings in the complexities and dynamics of how do we deal then with labor relations, how do we deal with those kind of aspects. In my own life as an HR manager for a big media company, at one point we had bureaus in some of Africa countries. So in part as my job, I had to obviously upskill myself in terms of that legislation and how it works, because obviously that's where they reside, although they have a contract then with us on this side of South Africa. But there are always some very interesting dynamics when it comes to that. And specifically if you have a multinational company all over the place and you want to start bargaining, you want to start negotiating, I can see that it will be quite a complex endeavor. But this is the way the world is moving. This is the way things is going to happen. And this is this reality that we are living in. And that's the new scamp of the new world of work, not even considering the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution, as well as artificial intelligence and all those kind of things, which many of us still grapple as how we're going to share that. Then Etienne Cornelis say, yeah, just thank you, sir. The presentation was good. Grace say, very, very clear, thank you. And then Pizzo say, it is true that majority unions are being controlled by the governing party. All right, so that's also a interesting statement that is coming forward that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so I think that, yeah, we're almost there on the time and on the spot for our webinar. So let me first of all thanks, just so a thanks of gratitude to Advocate Robenheimer by sharing again some great insight. Again, the way that Etienne, you have presented this for us was again a very clear, straightforward, explaining the concepts. And even I have gained again a much deeper understanding and much deeper insight into these particular two concepts, and then also how did you relate it into the question of our democracy and obviously the changing landscape of labor relations within the context of South Africa. Then also to our students there, guys. So thank you very much for taking the time. This is time well spent, and as Advocate Reibenheimer indicated, this is time that you invest in your own skills and your own abilities, and that is something nobody can take away from you. That is so valuable of doing that. So for everybody at joining us this evening, guys, thanks very much. I know you're taking time out of busy schedules, families, and work, and I do really appreciate that from my side as well. So so everybody, have a great evening, and for the students, the upcoming class test, online test, start preparing yourself. And I hope this also will help you to provide some insight if you may get questions regarding that. Again, thank you very much, guys. So we will talk again later.
Thank you, Henk. Much appreciated. Thank you to everybody, and all the best. Yes.
Yeah. So
All the best. May you be blessed. May you be successful in your studies and become well-versed human resource practitioners.
great stuff there. Thank you very much, Etienne. I appreciate. Guys, so stay well, stay safe, and I think we're almost at the weekend, and enjoy your Friday tomorrow. We will chat again soon.